Hello and welcome back to the Data Privacy Lawyer. It's Funmi speaking behind the camera. Today's review, we're going to be looking at Vans. It's a shoe company. It used to be pretty popular when I was a student. We're going to be looking at their cookie policy today. So we're doing a kind of review. I'm changing up the type of content that I post on the YouTube channel because I want viewers of this content to have insight into not just privacy notices on websites. There's a lot more that goes into personal data, and there's a lot more that constitutes personal data than the general public has an understanding of. One thing I do as a privacy counsel is I generally provide training and insight to people that aren't familiar with what constitutes personal data. And just for insight for this particular video, cookies do constitute personal data because they can identify an individual. Now we're going to be looking at this from the United States website. I'm just going to opine. I don't know the insights into what Vans is doing as an organization, but I think that the reason that there is a distinction between Sweden and the United States is because the data protection laws that relate to residents of Sweden is very different to the data protection laws that apply to residents of the United States. Now, the reason I make this distinction for this video is because when you land on a website, if there are cookies associated with how you interact with the site, there is specific steps in which an organization has to follow in order to comply with the data protection law where they process a resident's data. Now, that's very important for this audit. Now, I am going to carry on the United States website, but it may be that the process in which a Swedish resident might encounter or engage with this website may be different. Because in the European Union, under the data protection laws in the EU, it's important for organizations to give consumers the opportunity to opt in to cookies. And in the United States, the obligation under the data protection laws is to opt them out. So I'm going to carry on with the United States because ultimately my practice and my law firm are in the US. But I do think it would be interesting in the future to do an audit where we look at the process that we utilize when we are interacting with a European Union website as opposed to the United States, because some organizations, when they are drafting or creating their privacy program, they will have a Euro-centric approach, meaning they don't make a distinction between how they collect personal data. They look at the most restrictive of the data protection laws they have to adhere to, and they roll that out globally. So even if a resident isn't entitled to certain protections in a country, because they operate under the most restrictive of the data protection laws, everybody, all of their consumers are entitled to certain rights related to their data. So I hope that makes sense, but we're going to go to the United States website. We're going to look at the cookie policy. Let me see if I can open it. We're going to look at the Swedish one because I think that that is where the cookie policy exists. Yep. Okay, good. All right, let's carry on the Swedish page. So that's very interesting. The reason I changed the page is because when I logged into the United States website, I didn't see the cookie policy. Right? I think that you can only review the cookie policy if you are utilizing the Swedish webpage. I think that's very interesting, and I am intrigued into why Vans has decided to roll out the cookie policy on the European Union website in Sweden, but not in the United States, because cookies are also considered personal data in the United States, even if the obligations are to give consumers the opportunity to opt out of cookies. So maybe that's something that they're working on internally. Again, a privacy program is not something that you do one time and then forget about it. It's something that you're continually optimizing based on changes in the law and obligations as an organization. So I know we spent a lot of time on that. I really did want to look at this policy, but this particular one was updated July 12th, 2024 and is effective as of this date. So my general recommendation is organizations should be reviewing their public-facing documents on at least an annual basis. At this point, we're about a year and a half into this particular policy. I will say something that's interesting is we weren't presented with any type of cookie banner. Now, cookie banner is generally a pop-up that you receive on your webpage when you first interact with a site like Vans. And it basically gives you notice into the fact that cookies are being utilized and other tracking technologies. And generally, you should be presented with the opportunity to manage your preference center, managing which types of cookies are associated with your interaction with the site. And we weren't presented that despite the distinction between Sweden and the United States. So that would definitely be something that I would look into if I was privacy counsel for Vans. Let's have a look at some of the insights. So the site does use cookies. It applies to all digital means through which you can interact with us, which include the website. So it also looks like they've got a British website. They've made a distinction in what type of website you're going to be able to review based on the geography where you're accessing the site. Now, I don't have any particular comment on that, but I do think it's interesting that they've made that distinction here. This particular website appears to be the Sweden website, but they've made the name of the website to be the British website. So I'm not entirely sure what the distinction is there, but they have identified who the data controller is. And the reason this is very important is because if you as a consumer have any questions about how cookies are being utilized by Van, this would be the entity that you would reach out to. Now, something that's very unique, well, not necessarily unique, but something that a lot of global organizations will do is they'll have lots of different legal entities that control, certain types of personal data. It's really important for consumers to understand what this statement really means. If you as a consumer have any access requests, like you want Vans to let you know how you can access your own information, making sure that it's correct, this would be the entity that you're going to, irrespective of any additional information they might place on their site. So if you see a different entity, if you're not contacting the one that's acting as the data controller, then you need to understand this information before you fulfill any access requests that you might have. So they talked about the cookies. Let's see. This cookie policy describes and informs you of our use of cookies and other tracking technologies. By clicking the Accept All button on the site's cookie banner, now I just mentioned this, and we weren't actually presented with a cookie banner, and I'm not entirely sure if it's because I'm accessing the site from the United States, or there was that bit of confusion because I had originally selected United States. I'm not entirely sure, but we weren't presented with a cookie banner irrespective. So that would be something that their IT department would likely need to sort out because it's not being presented to consumers. Or by setting your cookie preference through our tool. That's so interesting. So I just clicked the button for their tool and it just led me back to the original cookie policy for the site. So that might also be a process flow situation that the IT team needs to figure out. And I had mentioned at the beginning of this video, and unfortunately we're not going to get to the entire cookie policy. If you want me to complete the review of this cookie policy, leave a comment below and I definitely will do so. But what I want to mention finally is that it's really important that all of the stakeholders within your organization are working together to roll out a successful privacy program, right? I presume that this cookie policy was probably drafted by legal or a privacy lawyer, right? But the person that actually uploads this to the site is the stakeholder within Vans who manages the website, which generally is not legal, right? When we clicked on the overview and we tried to manage our cookie preferences, I clicked this button and it took me right back to the actual cookie policy itself. And what's so interesting that just popped up was I think there was a cookie banner that appeared. So there seems to be some type of IT issue that needs to be resolved. But from a regulator's perspective, and generally what I see in the privacy industry, one of the first places that a regulator is going to go and visit when it comes to organizations are their public-facing documents, of which this cookie policy is one. So I really hope you enjoyed this simple review. I love talking about these policies. I have a massive repository for lots of different organizations that I've reviewed. So take a look at my channel and I will see you in a different video.